Part 10, when a woman stalks a man, legal system, mental illness, spirit children, and hoodoo. So, we said 1 week after being found guilty of criminal contempt, and now she's a criminal and so forth, she violates the court order once again. A show cause hearing for probation revocation was scheduled for August 9th, and we went to the hearing on August 9th, and then information from the civil case was entered into evidence within the criminal case. And we want to look at some of the information in the civil case because this undergirds a lot of what's going on and is, very detailed and so forth, full of misinformation. So let's look at the final amended petition. We talked about her filing at least 40 plus motions in this case, over 1,000 pages of nonsensical information, and we're going to get into it to show you the extent to which someone will go to manipulate the court system, try to free herself so that she can continue to stalk. Now, let's look at the factual background first, according to her, of this case. This final amended petition you'll see is e-filed on September 25th. And once again, everything we post here, is part of the public record. In the section for the background and factual, this case originated as a civil action aimed solely to prove respondent Kwesi Akhan, a therapist, religious leader, Odwirafo, traditional diviner, and Obinfo, scholar on matters of Nanasom, African ancestral religion, and Amamre culture, was guilty of defamation and malicious prosecution against petitioner. Petitioner is her. Respondent Kwesi Akhan remains ignorant as to his burden in this case regarding his allegations that petitioner, which is her, stalked him and is a mentally ill scam artist, noting that there is no factual evidence to support that petitioner's recent diagnosis of post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD, contributed to allegations by respondent Kwesi Akhan that petitioner stalked him due to infatuation. Petitioner realleges that all of her attempts to maintain a platonic relationship with and communicate with respondent Kwesi Akhan were aimed at one goal: escape and remain free from human trafficking, slavery with petitioner's children. At the time when petitioner, which is her, first met respondent Kwesi Akhan, petitioner and her children were being forced to reside at the Lakes of Lionsgate apartment complex. And so then she begins to talk about a lot of nonsense. So here she's beginning to build the case and add more and more false information about her 40 years in slavery, solely aimed at trying to get her out of this criminal case and even out of the anti-stalking order. Once again, she petitioned the appellate court and filed a writ of certiorari with the Supreme Court trying to get the original anti-stalking order overturned. How is she trying to do that? Because she's claiming, as she falsely and fraudulently claimed here in this civil suit, that her sole reason for reaching out to me and trying to come to my home was to escape slavery, even though her own emails and communications prove otherwise, but she was trying to perpetrate this fraud upon the court. So as she builds this false narrative, let's look at some more information from the civil suit that's entered into evidence in the criminal case, as well as the appellate court case and the, petition, as well as the cert petition and so forth. Let's look at this new origin story that she has that is totally fraudulent, but she has to utilize this to build this notion of escaping from slavery. Petitioner, which is her, was born on Sunday, April 1st, Kansas City, Bethany Hospital. Petitioner is a descendant of the Akhan people of Ghana, Ivory Coast region in West Africa, and born into a royal priesthood within the Asante subgroup. Petitioner was human trafficked, enslaved at birth by an employee of Bethany Hospital, Esther Jean Ross, a phlebotomist who also worked in the capacity as a rotating nurse when the hospital was understaffed. Esther Jean Ross obtained a fraudulent birth certificate from the state of Kansas, alleging she was the petitioner's biological mother. Of course, she's been lying, saying this isn't her real mother. And we're going to get into why she's lying about the identity of family members and so forth. Due to an alleged home birth, this allowed Esther Jean Ross to claim petitioner as a dependent on her annual income tax filings to the IRS, and to later use her social security number to make income tax filings to the IRS, and so forth. So let's scroll down a little bit. Petitioner, which is her, the stalker, would be enslaved by Esther for a total of 42 years and forced to endure advanced hypnosis, sexual servitude, breeding, forced labor, clinical trials, and intellectual property theft while a victim of human trafficking slavery. Esther and others employed to oversee petitioner noticed and reported petitioner's so-called owners, white Jewish people, the Jewish mafia, that petitioner had a unique spiritual gift. And although no one explained to petitioner the nature of her spiritual gifts, decades later, petitioner would discover, upon reading literature found on Kwesi Akhan's website, Odwirafo.com, that petitioner's spiritual gift, which the white culture calls qualitative analysis, was actually an ability to unknowing slip into a trance state of Akhan, spiritual possession, and Nkam, spiritual communication, by Inyame Wa Inyame, the Supreme Being, the Abosom, the deities, the forces in nature, the Nananom Nsaman for the ancestresses and ancestors who are honorable, to predict the future in terms of proposed actions, solve complex personal and business-related problems, and create intellectual property regardless of the subject matter or industry in question. See how she wove in my website, the white Jewish mafia, her 42 years as a slave from birth, but then she can tie her quote-unquote spiritual gifts that she always had as a child and link that to coming in contact with my website. She has to build this story. Now, said spiritual gifts are only intended to benefit Black people and sustain the reclamation of petitioner's sovereign territory, land inheritance, held by petitioner's general partnership, Quindaro, now Kwa Nduro Abain, as a segregated incorporated Black town founded upon her Black ancestral values. Petitioner alleges that the IRS had prevented petitioner from legally claiming tax exemptions and credits and in turn receiving applicable tax refunds as managing partner of Quindaro from 97 to the present date. So she's now pretending like she was dealing with Quindaro since 97, which of course is a lie. She just made that up a few years ago. Now we get into the core of her new origin story. Esther Jean Ross, her mother, who now she's claiming is not her real mother, began leasing petitioner as a sex slave at the age of 2. Petitioner was soon declared a child prodigy, and Esther Jean Ross began leasing petitioner as a personal and business medium to prominent government officials, business owners, professionals, and others who lived in the historical and still prominent West Heights subdivision where Esther Jean Ross lived in Wyandotte County, Kansas, at the age of 3. Petitioner was leased by various groups, fraternities, sororities, businesses, corporations, government agencies, etc., to use her spiritual gifts of Akhan, spirit possession, and Nkam, spirit communication, words she learned from our website, and given various insignificant titles to perform executive level operations and management tasks. Petitioner became known in the human trafficking network circles as Sleeping Princess and the Golden Goose. Petitioner could read and write when she was 2 years old and was only permitted to speak British English. To prevent drawing attention to petitioner's gifts, Esther Jean Ross refused to allow petitioner to advance 2 grade levels as recommended by school officials at petitioner's elementary school. Petitioner was bred, forced to legally marry human traffickers and slavers, engaged in immigration fraud, and lied to state and federal social service agencies to hide the fact that petitioner and petitioner's children's status as human trafficking victims. Despite Esther Jean Ross denying petitioner the right to name petitioner's children, choose the names of men listed on the birth certificates of petitioner's children, and the so-called godparents of petitioner's children, petitioner birthed and raised her 3 children to the best of her ability. Okay, so let's recap. She could read and write by the age of 2 or 3. At the age of 2 or 3, she was leased out to fraternities and sororities and businesses and government agencies because she had the gift of spirit possession and spirit communication. And she was even called the sleeping princess and the golden goose. You know, in the human trafficking circles, that's who she was. 42 years a slave, but eventually she'll talk about how she broke free when she came in contact with my website, 40 plus years later, realized that what I was saying on that website is what she's been experiencing spiritually. And it's not a problem with people reading what's on my website or other people's websites. A lot of people talk about African ancestral religion and so forth, and spirituality and communicating with the ancestral realm, and your great grandmother whose spirit comes to you, even after she passed, to assist you with your baby. And, people talk about that all the time. So, but she had to link it, and she had to link it. So it was only after she came in contact with my website 40 plus years later that she realized that her gifts were properly defined through the Akhan culture. So she was able to link with me, and in that context, she realized she was part of this, and therefore she's going to link it later. Of course, she had to escape from slavery after 42 years by coming to my house. Nonsense. And of course, businesses, fraternities, sororities, government officials, and so forth, they didn't have any problem paying for a 3-year-old to prophesy to them. I mean, it happens every day. So let's get on to the next part. This next part is important because you already talked about a biological mother is not really her mother. She's trying to put forward, a narrative about that. And now she's going to talk about identity of, her 3 sons, and one of them that she constantly brings up on a regular basis throughout this narrative. And, we're going to get into why. Yao Pereko Ba'akain Aibo Akhan, forced legal birth name, Emmanuel Scott III, subsequent forced legal adoption name, Emmanuel Antonio Renario, was petitioner's firstborn son. The apple of petitioner's eye. Then she mentions the 2 other sons. She says, these other 2 sons are petitioner's second and third-born sons, respectively, conceived as twins and separated shortly after conception because petitioner's so-called owners declared petitioner would be too distracted from her assigned tasks if she carried and birthed them at the same time. Thus, the zygote of petitioner's third-born son was initially frozen and reinserted into petitioner's womb via in vitro fertilization 6 weeks after the birth of petitioner's second-born son. The welfare of petitioner's children was frequently used to blackmail petitioner to continue engaging in the various revenue-generating forced labor activities. Now we get to the crux of the identity of the firstborn son that she lies about continuously in a disturbing fashion to push forward her perverse narrative. And she also gets exposed. Petitioner's firstborn son, the apple of petitioner's eye, was born 1 pound, 6.4 ounces at 23 weeks gestation, blind in his left eye, with a hole in his heart due to the abuse petitioner was subjected to throughout her pregnancy. The first words of petitioner's firstborn son, the apple of petitioner's eye, revealed an anomaly: his ability to fluently speak the Akhan tree language. Before the age of 3, it became apparent his spiritual gifts included adibisa, divination, akom, spirit possession, and unkom, spirit communication, that far exceeded that of petitioner. So he was 3, doing all this possession and communication and divination and speaking other languages, just like when she was 3, she was the sleeping princess on the golden goose. So much so that petitioner's firstborn son predicted his own murder at the hands of human traffickers and slavers when he was 7 years old, and conveyed his futuristic and dying wish that petitioner would succeed in freeing their family from slavery and reclaiming land stolen from their family. However, it would be more than 7 years later before petitioner had any idea where the land was that he was referring to, and 7 more years before, as predicted, petitioner's firstborn son was murdered. Petitioner's firstborn son would spend his last days in agony while enslavers made sport of torturing him. Enslavers would run him over and disfigure him using a lawnmower. Garden shears were used to cut off his fingers and toes one by one. A weed eater would be used to lacerate nearly every inch of his body. Enslavers hacked over his legs with a heavy-duty, large-capacity trash truck before using small, sharp axes to hack off his arms and legs and to stop the bleeding. Cauterized with blowtorches. Days later, he would be fitted with a dog collar with an attached leash and forced to crawl everywhere on his remaining limbs, nubs. From then on, he was only fed dog bones and deprived of water. He was forced to sleep and eat in his own urine and feces day and night, and sodomized daily. Eventually, his tongue would be cut off and his left eye gouged out. He would be doused with acetone and set on fire. This torture ended with him being stabbed in the heart and decapitated on October 21st, 2019 at 6:23 a.m. after having spent his entire life enslaved. Petitioner did not know the locations where petitioner's firstborn son was being held captive throughout this process, but unceasingly begged her so-called owners to allow her to switch places with him, to endure whatever punishment they had planned for him and already inflicted upon. Yet petitioner's so-called owners would not relent. They were adamant in declaring his suffering was petitioner's fault, and this was the best means to teach petitioner a lesson to be obedient at all times, under all circumstances. However, the inhumane treatment of petitioner's firstborn son did not make petitioner more obedient. It made petitioner hate them with an unspeakable hate, a divine hate that will never die and can never be extinguished. Petitioner's so-called owners ordered his head to be delivered to petitioner for forced viewing. Thus, less than 30 minutes later, petitioner was forced to view the decapitated head of petitioner's firstborn son, the apple of petitioner's eye, in a backpack worn by a white male posing as an early morning jogger. Okay, look. So, he was 3. He could see into the future, predict events, even on a higher level than her. They caught him, they cut off his arms, cut off his legs, ran him over with a lawnmower, cauterized the wounds with a blowtorch, put a dog collar on him, made him eat bones and so forth, sodomized him. He had the nubs and so forth. But eventually stabbed him in his heart and, killed him, cut his head off. And then when she was out, and she mentions this in different, filings, an agent, a white male agent posing as a as an early morning jogger, opened up his backpack, and the head of her son was in the backpack. So this is what's going on in this 42 years of slavery, and this is why she had to escape. Look at what they did to her firstborn son. If they can decapitate him, what else are they going to do? They had to teach her a lesson. You need to keep working on these tasks as the slave, because if you don't, we'll kill everybody. So it's very interesting, because when she was sitting outside of my door and leaning against my door, when she showed up at my house for the second time in October of 2021, when I called the police and so forth, and I said she was ranting and speaking through the door and all of that. One of the things she said was her son was killed and his tongue was torn out and he was decapitated. They cut his head off, and she was crying and everything else. Only one problem with that. She said he was decapitated in 2019, in October of 2019. Turns out he was arrested in 2022. Minor offense, but he was arrested and held shortly, but he was arrested, and it's posted on the county, law enforcement website for everyone to see. So if he was decapitated in 2019, how is he walking around in 2022? So she didn't realize that when she first filed the civil suit. She filed the civil suit just a few days after he was arrested. So she didn't know he had been arrested. So this was already in the court, record of him being decapitated. And then she finds out later that he's been arrested. So his identity of never having been murdered, and of course he's never been in slavery. Her children have gone to college and they're doing well in college and everything else. And they're even online and so forth. So, and she's posted pictures of them online and in college and so forth. But of course she would say that, the enslavers allowed them to go to college and take pictures to pretend like they weren't in slavery, just to put forth that, facade. But then after slavery, or after the pictures at the school and so forth, we have to come back to slavery. The enslavers would let us go on vacation. I'll take a weekend vacation to, Miami and so forth, just to put forth the image that I wasn't in slavery. But right after that vacation, I had to come right back to slavery or else. So when she gets caught up, she files this, civil suit in October of 2022, a few days after, her son is arrested. So now she gets caught at some point. She gets, caught. Now what does she do? She does what she always does, and this is just an example of that. She weaves an entire narrative, a fraudulent narrative, around this new information to account for the new information. Let's see how she weaves this narrative. And this, again, is brought into the criminal case. Let's look at it. What is the story going to be? After the murder of petitioner's firstborn son, petitioner's so-called employers employed and still employ a young man of similar appearance to impersonate petitioner's firstborn son, inclusive of making daily quote-unquote public appearances. Despite this, the fingerprints taken of petitioner's firstborn son at Kansas University Medical Center at the time of his birth on June 5th, 1997, do not match those of the aforementioned imposter who was in the possession of the state driver's license of and alleged his identity to be that of petitioner's firstborn son, the apple of petitioner's eye, when he was issued ticket number 1800 plus before being arrested and fingerprinted at Joplin Police Department located at this address on September 13th, 2022. So when she gets caught lying, and this is already part of the court record, this is an amended petition. The first petition filed months prior didn't have this information. So when she gets caught lying. And in the story she's, was telling for a long time, didn't have this information. When she gets caught lying, all of a sudden, her real son has been murdered. His head is in the backpack, of course. But now there's an imposter, there's a clone. Someone who looks exactly like her son. He makes daily public appearances. He has her son's driver's license, and he happened to be arrested. And, he produced that driver's license showing that he was who he said he was. But according to her, he's an imposter. So she asked the court to order that DNA tests be performed on this young man and fingerprints be, taken and all this other nonsense, which she knows. Of course, I'm not going to order that foolishness because she's just making up stories. But this is what takes place. So all of this kind of information is being, pushed in not only the civil suit, but once again in the criminal case. Now, I filed a motion for a summary judgment. And for those who are unaware, if you have a civil case filed against you and so forth, one of the things you can do, if you agree upon the basic points, did Kwesi Akhan call me mentally ill? Both parties agree that he did that online. Did Kwesi Akhan say, I'm a stalker? We both agree to that. Did Kwesi Akhan say, I'm a scam artist? We both agree to that. If we can show that the basic points we do agree on, yet it still doesn't rise to the level of defamation and personal injury, then the judge can, find in a summary judgment that you haven't met the requirements, all of the elements of the case, and therefore it can be thrown out without going to trial. I filed a 35 plus page motion for summary judgment. I was representing myself. Ultimately, the judge found in my favor, and this civil suit was thrown out. Let me show you that real quick. So as you can see here, in Superior Court of the District of Columbia Civil Division, this is the case. Judge Yvonne Williams. Order granting motion for summary judgment. Before the court is pro se defendants Kwesi Akhan motion for summary judgment. About August 14th, 2023. Nearly 5 years to the day that she sent that original email. And refiled on September 22nd, 2023. For the reasons set forth below, the motion is granted. So, I won the case on every count. The case is therefore, thrown out and so forth. But this is, this was a nearly year-long process with regard to this civil case, and it was all subterfuge. It was all designed to try to affect or manipulate the original anti-stalking order to try to get that, annulled, so to speak, as well as to try to manipulate this process in the criminal case. So now we're going to go back to the probation revocation hearing and how some of this information, specifically a specific point, was brought forward within the probation revocation hearing that ties all of this together.